A new poll has revealed what we might think the outcome of the federal election would be if it was held today. Let's bring in Redbridge Group Director Simon Welsh. Simon, good to see you. So this poll is quite big in sample size, 4,000 people. What have you found?
Yeah, thanks, Laura. Yeah, it's 4,000 people poll, and what we've done is use that sample size to be able to run some statistical models over to sort of predict where the election result is going to fall, even at a seat level. So it's really taking those sort of headline results that you often hear about two-party preferred and those sorts of things, and matching that through sort of demographic modelling down to what we think is going to happen at particular seat level. And basically what it's sort of telling us is that right now it's sort of looking at a status quo type result, that the model is saying that there's a 50% chance of a Labor majority government, there's a 50% chance of a Labor minority government, and the Libs just really aren't in the running in terms of being able to form government. So really, it's kind of status quo, which I think is actually quite fascinating in the sense of, as we've been discussing on this program, the headwinds and the battering that this government is facing. Why aren't the Libs picking up more seats? In this model, there's a few seats that are sort of in the close to call. They might pick up 2 or 3, even if all models are wrong. So even if they pick up, it'll do a little bit better than the model is predicting. It's far from the kind of electoral renewal that you might expect, given the sort of the economic circumstances and the economic headwinds. So I think there's a few things going on there, and clearly what's happening is, yes, the Labor primary vote is dropping, but there's not that transference from Labor to Liberal that traditionally we've seen in Australian politics. And I think pulling that thread and understanding why that's happening is the interesting thing, I think, out of this sort of status quo. Is what we're seeing is, in those seats that Labor picked up at the last election that are really characterised by younger, university-educated electorates. So I'm thinking here of places like Reid, Bennelong, even Swan with high levels of university education in WA. They're not coming back to the Libs. So we know those voters are increasingly leaning progressive, and I think as we've discussed, Peter Dutton clearly isn't the vehicle for those sorts of progressive values that those voters are looking for. I think that's kind of easy to explain. What's happening outside of that? What's happening in those outer suburbs? Look, there is some gains there for the Libs in terms of their vote, but it's still not enough. It's not enough to get them over the line in some of these historically safer Labor seats. And I think there's a couple of things going on there. The main thing is that when we get these folk in a focus group, they talk to us about no sense of a need or a proposition for change. In other words, you sort of talk to them, do you think things would be different with a Liberal government? And the answer is no. The part of that is just part of the electoral cycle. That's kind of where we're at in the electoral cycle. And you expect a bit of that. It's hard for oppositions to cut through and those sorts of things. But there's some deeper headwinds there that I think make it hard for the Liberals to get traction in those areas. The first is just this profound cynicism of both major parties. So, this sense that you could swap out one major party, swap in another one, and you'll get difference. Voters just decreasingly accept that proposition. They're both seen now as the same side of this, of the same coin, a different side of the same coin. Sorry, mixing up the metaphors. The other thing is those electorates still have quite an entrenched cynicism about the Liberals. These are often Labor electorates, historical Labor electorates. You're asking people to change a pattern of behaviour that's well established. And so they sort of see the Liberals as not representative of their community. They're for the rich folk, the business owners, and those sorts of things. But also there is this broader sense that that historically we often talk about the Liberals were the better economic managers. There was that sort of almost cliche truth about the Liberals. We no longer find that has been eroded. And so what we see in these communities is the Liberals are the people that, along with Labor, both of them together, have sort of contributed to the loss of jobs in our area, the diminishment of services, these sorts of things. So the economic, if the Libs thought they could roll into these areas with that sort of use that economic brand in the time of an economic crisis to try and sort of punch a hole in Labor's support in that area. It's not working because, as I say, they're both seeing different sides of the same coin, even on the economy and the results that that the people are living with.
It's so fascinating that you say that basically they don't see any difference between the two major parties, because this has been like the ideological debate within the Liberals ever since they lost the election, too far to the left, etc., etc. But you couldn't accuse Peter Dutton of being that. You couldn't accuse Peter Dutton and Anthony Albanese of being, like for like, the same kind of people at all. So I find that a fascinating proposition, and perhaps a pretty scary existential proposition for the Liberal Party if voters in marginal seats that need to change hands just see Peter Dutton as like for like.
Yeah, it's because these voters, like I suppose most voters, they're not engaged in the political theatre. They're not engaged in the day-to-day political coverage and the minutiae and the analysis of all of that. What they're engaged with is the effect on their life. And the effect on their lives now over a long period of time, over different governments, has been the same.
So are they engaged in the policy or just the general vibe of things?
It depends. So they will get engaged on some policy areas where they see a particular relevance to themselves. For example, we know on nuclear, for example, when we talk to people in the outer suburbs about nuclear, they're really nervous about it. They're really nervous about it because their lived experience has been that both sides of the political spectrum are quite happy to, inflict hurt upon their electorates. Where do they think the nuclear power stations are going to go? In their electorates, in their backyards. Where do they think the waste treatment's going to go? In their electorates, in their backyard, because that's been their experience over multiple cycles, different governments, both persuasions. They end up on the sort of the wrong end of the boot on these sorts of things.
Simon, always good to talk to you. Fascinating 12 months or so ahead. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, Laura.